Everyone thought the future of clean energy would be millions of solar panels glittering on rooftops across the world. That was the story. That was the assumption baked into a decade of headlines, government subsidies, and glossy advertisements. But while the world was watching the panels, Tesla was quietly building something else entirely, something almost nobody was paying attention to, and it had almost nothing to do with sunlight. Here is the sentence that should stop you cold. Solar power was never the thing that was going to save the electrical grid. It was never even close. Solar panels generate electricity only when the sun is shining, which means for roughly half of every single day, and for entire seasons in some regions, they produce nothing at all. The grid does not care about sunshine. The grid cares about a constant split-second balance between supply and demand, 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Solar alone was never built to solve that problem. It was only ever half of an answer. So what was Tesla actually building? Not more panels, not bigger factories full of glass and silicon. Tesla was building an army of batteries, sitting quietly in garages and utility closets in millions of ordinary homes, and then stitching them together with software into something the energy industry calls a virtual power plant. Not a metaphor, a literal functioning power plant that does not exist in any single location, made of thousands of small batteries acting in perfect coordination as one enormous machine. Before we go further, you need to understand why this matters right now in this exact moment more than at any point in the last 50 years. Electricity demand is exploding. Artificial intelligence data centers are consuming staggering amounts of power around the clock. Electric vehicles are multiplying on every road in the developed world, each one another mouth to feed on the grid. Entire industries are electrifying, from heating systems to factories, all pulling from the same aging wires that were designed for a world that no longer exists. The grid built in the 20th century was never designed for this kind of pressure, and building new power plants the traditional way takes years of permitting, construction, and political fighting. The world does not have years. The world needs new capacity now. This is where the golden fact of this entire story lives. The number that nobody is talking about loudly enough. A traditional gas peaker plant, the kind utilities build specifically to handle moments of extreme demand, costs roughly $43 million a year to operate for 400 megawatts of capacity. A virtual power plant of the same size, built from home batteries that already exist in people's garages, costs Tesla and its partners roughly $2 million a year to run. That is not a small improvement. That is a reduction of about 95%. Read that again, 95% cheaper, and it can be deployed in months instead of years, because the hardware is already installed in someone's house. Let us talk about scale in terms you can actually feel. By the end of 2025, Tesla had installed more than 1 million Powerwalls around the world. Of those, more than 213,000 were enrolled in active virtual power plant programs, delivering more than 20 gigawatt hours of electricity back into the grid over the course of the year. Picture that not as a number on a slide, but as a physical wall of energy, sitting silently in garages from Adelaide to San Juan, waiting for a signal from software to wake up and start pushing power exactly where it is needed. Now picture Puerto Rico, an island that has suffered some of the worst blackouts in modern American history, where hurricanes have repeatedly torn the traditional grid apart. More than 63,000 Powerwalls are now installed across the island, capable of delivering up to 50 megawatts during peak stress events. When the old centralized grid begins to buckle, this scattered network of home batteries becomes the backstop that prevents the entire island from going dark. This is not a hypothetical. This has already happened, repeatedly, and it is happening again right now. Here is where the story stops being about batteries and starts being about something much bigger. Something almost nobody outside the energy industry understands yet. The batteries themselves are not actually the most valuable part of this system. The software is. Tesla built a platform called AutoBidder, an artificial intelligence-driven trading engine that decides in real time when to charge a battery, when to discharge it, and where to sell that electricity for the highest possible value. In 2025, this software managed nearly 6 gigawatt hours of energy across dozens of sites, and it was ranked the top performing optimizer in the entire United Kingdom for the 4th year in a row. Without this software, a Powerwall is just a box that stores electricity. With it, that same box becomes a financial instrument, trading energy on wholesale markets faster and more precisely than any human trader ever could. This is the moment where you need to stop thinking about Tesla as a car company that also sells batteries and start thinking about Tesla as something closer to a financial technology company that happens to sell hardware. The real product is not the battery sitting in your garage. The real product is the intelligence deciding what that battery does every single second across a network of hundreds of thousands of homes simultaneously. That intelligence is the thing utilities are quietly becoming dependent on, whether they admit it publicly or not. Consider the state of California, where the grid operator known as CAISO now sees batteries supplying roughly 18% of evening peak electricity demand on hot summer days. 18% coming not from a single massive power station, but from a swarm of distributed batteries responding in seconds to signals almost nobody outside the control room ever sees. In January of 2026, battery storage in California hit a peak output of just over 10,000 megawatts, a number that would have sounded like science fiction only 5 years earlier. Now think about Australia, where Tesla's giant utility-scale batteries, known as megapacks, responded to every single one of more than 150 grid frequency emergencies throughout 2025. Every single one. Not most, all of them. Traditional power plants simply cannot react that fast. A gas plant needs minutes, sometimes longer, to ramp up output. A battery responds in seconds, correcting a wobble in grid frequency before most people would even notice the lights flicker. This is the deeper truth the documentary title was hiding. The old electrical grid was built like a human body with one giant heart, a single centralized power station pumping electricity outward through veins of wire to every home and business. If that heart faltered, the whole body suffered. Tesla's approach replaces that single heart with millions of tiny hearts, each one small, each one imperfect on its own, but together forming something far more resilient than any single power plant could ever be. When one battery goes offline, nothing happens to the system as a whole. When one traditional power plant goes offline, an entire region can lose power. And here is where the story pushes further than most people are willing to imagine. In June of 2026, 3 major players in the industry, Tesla, Sunrun, and a company called Renew Home, announced a framework to combine home batteries and smart thermostats into a network with a theoretical capacity of more than 16 gigawatts. To put that number in perspective, 16 gigawatts is roughly equivalent to the output of 16 large nuclear reactors. Except this capacity would not come from massive concrete structures built over a decade. It would come from devices already sitting inside ordinary homes, devices people already own, simply coordinated differently. Only a small fraction of that capacity, around 300 megawatts, is immediately deployable today, largely aimed at powering data centers in Virginia. But the direction is unmistakable. The blueprint has been drawn. So who actually benefits from all of this? Homeowners are earning real money simply for owning a battery and letting it participate. In Puerto Rico, participants earn around $1 per kilowatt hour during grid events, adding up to roughly $360 a year per household on average. In parts of New England, similar programs pay homeowners between $180 and $275 per kilowatt of capacity enrolled, which can total several $100s a year for a single power wall. For the first time in the history of electricity, ordinary homeowners are being paid to be part of the power plant rather than simply paying to consume from one. For Tesla, the numbers are staggering in a different way. The energy division alone generated $12.8 billion in revenue in 2025, growing 27% year over year, with gross margins around 30%, nearly double the margin of Tesla's automotive business. Energy storage now drives close to a quarter of Tesla's total gross profit. Somewhere along the way, without most of the public noticing, the company that built its reputation on electric cars quietly became one of the most important energy infrastructure companies on the planet. Now here is the question worth sitting with. If a network of a few 100,000 batteries can already replace a meaningful slice of traditional power generation, cutting costs by 95% and responding faster than any conventional plant ever could, what happens when that number reaches 5 million homes? What happens when it reaches 50 million? Does the traditional idea of a power plant, a massive fenced facility with smokestacks and turbines, become obsolete entirely? Or does it simply shrink into a backup role, a last resort behind a much faster, much cheaper, endlessly distributed alternative sitting quietly in garages around the world? That is the debate the energy industry is having behind closed doors right now, and it is worth asking yourself which side of that argument you actually believe. The United States Department of Energy has already picked a direction. Its official roadmap targets somewhere between 80 and 160 gigawatts of virtual power plant capacity by the year 2030, representing as much as 20% of the entire country's peak electricity demand. 20% of an entire nation's peak power, coming not from new power plants built on empty land, but from devices already installed inside people's homes. Wood Mackenzie separately projects that virtual power plants in North America alone could reach 30 43 gigawatts by that same year. These are not fringe predictions from enthusiasts. These are the working assumptions of the institutions responsible for keeping the lights on. This is why the framing of solar being dead was always the wrong question. Solar did not die. Solar simply stopped being the main character in this story. Panels on a roof are still useful, they still generate clean electricity, but on their own they were never going to solve the deeper problem of a grid under increasing strain from artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and an electrifying economy. What solar needed all along was a partner capable of storing that energy and deploying it with intelligence and precision. Tesla built that partner, not out of some sudden burst of environmental idealism, but because the economics were simply too good to ignore. 95% cheaper than a gas peaker plant is not a marketing slogan. It is a business case that utilities cannot afford to keep ignoring. So here is where this documentary leaves you. The next major infrastructure story of this decade may not be a headline about artificial intelligence itself, or about the next great leap in computing power. It may be the quieter, less glamorous story about who keeps all of that computing power running, who keeps electric vehicles charged, who keeps entire cities lit when the traditional grid buckles under pressure it was never designed to handle. The future power plant may never require a groundbreaking ceremony or a ribbon cutting. It may already be sitting in a garage down the street from you, one battery among millions, quietly waiting for the signal to wake up and become part of something enormous. The next trillion-dollar industry may not be artificial intelligence itself. It may be the invisible infrastructure that keeps artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and entire cities powered. Built not from concrete and steel in a single location, but from millions of small decisions made by software spread across millions of homes working together as one. To not be caught off guard by what comes next in this industry, join us, because the next chapter of this story is only just beginning.